Yeah, I think we're live.
Yes. Good morning, everyone. Hello. Welcome to our webinar debut, How to Make Sensitive Topics Engaging. I'm Fran. I'm the Creative Solutions Manager here at Creature Media. Your time is really valuable, so thank you for choosing to spend it with us this morning. We're going to have a couple of minutes just for people to join. So in the meantime, why don't you let us know in the comments where you're dialing in from. Let's see how far this is reaching. I'll kick off. I'm in sunny South London.
Sunny Suffolk. Oxfordshire. Oh, very nice. Yeah, I'm in London as well. Oh, Birmingham.
Birmingham, hello.
A fellow person from the Midlands. Hello.
Oh, lovely Surrey.
Surrey. Oh, yeah. We're all just desperate to get out of the city, I think. Yeah. Very envious of you guys dialing in from the countryside.
Yeah, I actually live in an old police station, so it really is lockdown. Great. So we'll start at 3 minutes past, just to be weirdly precise. So in a second, I will be handing over to my content director, Gemma, who you can also see on screen. And she will take you through our lovely webinar. Great. So I think we're just about ready now. Yeah.
Cool.
Great. So I'll hand you over to Gemma.
Thank you, Fran. Right, well, hello everyone. Welcome to this Creature Media webinar, which is actually my first ever webinar, so please go easy on me. Also, I think I should quickly mention that I live with two very excitable cockapoos who get incredibly excited if the postman arrives in the next half an hour. So I'm sorry in advance if you can hear sort of chaotic barking going on in the background. Hopefully it won't be for very long. So my name is Gemma Chandler. I've worked for Creature Media for about 4 years now, and I'm a content strategist specialising in digital, and I head up all of the content projects for the agency. Creature Media are quite a unique agency because, as well as being an agency, we're also a brand owner. So we are actually the publishers of National Geographic Kids magazine in the UK, Ireland, South Africa, New Zealand and Australia. And we've been publishing that for over 10 years now. And so it's in our experience publishing Nat Geo Kids that has led us to become a specialist content agency. So we specialise in communicating real world, often quite sensitive topics to our audience, and particularly those to do with the environment. So climate change, plastic pollution, natural disasters such as the Australian bushfires that happened earlier this year. And we create content that engages and inspires audiences in those topics in a way that leaves them feeling informed and empowered rather than disheartened or depressed. So here are a few of the clients that we've tackled tricky topics for. So we've worked with Clarks to help them communicate around endangered species. We've worked with Lego for several years now to help them communicate fragile habitats and ecosystems. And most recently, we've worked with Purcell to deliver nature-focused activities to families who are stuck indoors during the coronavirus pandemic. And those activities have had a specific nature focus to help families feel connected to nature. So here are the things that we're going to be covering during this webinar. So we'll be looking at using storytelling to communicate sensitive subjects, a quick kind of do's and don'ts checklist that we kind of stick by here at Creature, how to inspire action through positive storytelling, and then we'll have about 10 minutes towards the end for questions. If you do have any, don't hesitate to just pop them in the chat function and we will try and answer as many as we can. Okay, so kicking off, using storytelling to communicate sensitive subjects. So anyone who's a content creator or works with content creators will know that storytelling is the most powerful weapon in your arsenal. It's one of the most engaging and actually oldest forms of communication, and it enables people to form their own observations, find empathy, and drive a deeper connection with a topic. So obviously, all stories have a beginning, a middle, and an end, and that's the structure that we kind of use when we're communicating sensitive or challenging topics. So quick little storytelling 101 here. So the beginning, this is where you can introduce your audience to the topic. It's incredibly important at this point early on in the content to be very clear, to the point, and to use layman's terms as well. So if we imagine that the subject was the climate crisis, for example, this is where you'd explain in basic terms what climate change is. So greenhouse gases being released into the atmosphere, trapping heat, which is gradually warming up our planet. And this is where you'd focus on the who, the what, the where, and the when. And then moving into the middle, this is where you can really get into the nitty-gritty of the topic. So there may be some more complex issues that need further explaining in this section. For example, going back to climate change again, the effects that the climate crisis is having on habitats, on animals, and on humans. That said, there's always positivity to be harnessed in this middle section. So thinking about, for example, the possible solutions to climate change and the people who are working incredibly hard towards making those solutions a reality. So focusing on the how and the why in this middle section. And then finally coming to the end, this is the part of the story that will influence the way that a person feels after they've read your content. So how do you want them to feel? Do you want them to leave feeling disheartened or hopeless, or would you rather they left feeling empowered and optimistic? You can use this section to sort of reassure your audience that despite the challenges, there is hope and that they themselves can actually make a difference. So you can do that by giving them easy actions that they can do themselves to help. So quick run through of our do's and don'ts. Okay, number one, don't overwhelm. Some of you might recognise this document that's on the left-hand side here, and it's been hitting the headlines a lot, obviously, in the last couple of weeks. It's certainly not what I would call an engaging document. It's 130 pages long, and it's a public-facing document, and I just don't see many everyday people making it to page 130, maybe not even making it past page 3, which I think is Boris Johnson's foreword to the document. I think when tackling tricky topics, the temptation is to tell the absolute full and detailed story, kind of leaving nothing out. And while it's important to ensure that all the fundamental facts are there, it's equally important not to overwhelm your audience. If you do that, all that will happen is people will switch off. People are time poor, they're overwhelmed with content all the time. It's just not going to be good. So we always start by kind of whittling down the information that we have into the absolute essential points that we know we definitely need to include, and then build from there. Do simplify. So you might find all sorts of expert statistics and depths of complexity when you're kind of researching the topic that you're communicating. And while it's great to have lots of sources, all those complexities take an awful lot of explaining. And in order to keep people engaged, it's best to just keep things as simplified as possible. So, for the reasons we've already discussed, like not overwhelming your audience with information. So the way we usually do that is we break up long pieces of information into bite-sized chunks of text, keeping it digestible for the reader. So we use short paragraphs, we use snappy and clear subheads and headlines, and always consider, especially if you're working with a digital platform, that people, 50 to 60% of people are going to skim read your content. So we usually highlight the really important points in bold. So do be honest. We take a candid approach towards communicating tricky topics at Creature. Don't skirt around the issue. The communication will only come across as disingenuous, or even worse, actually completely fail to inform the reader adequately. Tackle the topic as head-on as you can, but exercise caution and use sensitivity if the topic, for example, could cause distress, and of course keep it age or audience appropriate. Only you guys know the audience you're communicating to, and so it's kind of a judgment call on that one. Do be trusting. So I think something that content creators can sometimes forget is to trust in the emotional intelligence of their audience. So human beings are naturally curious creatures. We're curious about learning about the world, and particularly about topics that are unfamiliar to us, and sometimes topics that are quite shocking in nature. And so just when you're creating content, allow that sort of trust in your audience to give you confidence in your communications. Don't sugarcoat. It's definitely okay to be selective about the information that you include in your content, but don't dumb it down, and don't exclude details that you maybe don't want to include but are really crucial to the story. No one wants to be accused of cherry picking, or even worse, of greenwashing. Do be positive. You might think that it's hard to find a positive angle in something like a natural disaster, or the climate crisis, or more recently, a global pandemic. But for me, this is the most crucial part of the storytelling process. So look for positive angles that will help to convert the reader's feelings of sadness or shock into passion or action. So think, for example, of our amazing NHS workers, or someone like Captain Tom, for example. There are always positive examples to be found, no matter how small. And we'll discuss this use of positivity again a little bit further through the webinar. So do remain objective. Try wherever you can to do that. It's often difficult not to imprint our own kind of opinions or beliefs on our work. But when it comes to sensitive subjects, especially if you're communicating about environmental topics, things are rarely as clear-cut as being black or white or good or evil. And therefore, we find it's best to just leave the audience to draw their own conclusions. Do use visuals. So visuals help to illustrate a story, and they stop a person's attention from waning too. Sometimes a visual, like a diagram or an infographic, for example, can do a far better job of explaining a complex subject than words ever could. For distressing subjects, visuals may be challenging, but you can still focus visuals on characters from the story, or even use stock imagery that brings the story or certain concepts to life, but without being graphic or upsetting. Don't make assumptions. So don't assume that just because you have some prior knowledge about a topic, that your audience does too. You should write your piece of content as though this is a completely blank canvas, so it's your audience's first introduction to this topic. Cool, okay, so yeah, inspiring action through positivity. There have been several studies that have linked negativity to disengagement. So it's the reason that we turn off the news if things become quite overwhelming, or the reason you come off social media because you are trying to avoid the negativity that's filling your feed. I think we could all relate to feeling immobilized and pessimistic when we're faced with issues like the climate crisis, for example, or the coronavirus pandemic. This is particularly relevant when communicating climate-related topics. That feeling of hopelessness has been linked to one of the main causes of eco-anxiety and the biggest cause of inaction or of disengagement. So at Creature Media, there's a particular structure that we follow in order to combat eco-anxiety and to inspire hope and action. We think of it rather like our magic formula. And again, you can link this to the sort of beginning, the middle and the end story structure that we referred to earlier. So we start by informing. So we provide the audience with the information that they need. We inspire by providing examples of positive change, and we empower by providing tools for individuals to take their own action. So I think this is a really apt piece of communication that follows this structure perfectly. It's simple, it's clear, it's concise, and it ends on a positive empowerment message about saving lives. That's something that all of us can do. And it does this all in just 7 words. So here's a recent example of a piece of content where we've used this structure. So this is one of our own pieces of coronavirus communication. So we've started by laying out the facts, so informing the reader with the who, what, where, when, why, and how. We've provided the audience with knowledge, and by doing that, we increase their understanding of the topic and therefore their ability to have informed discussions and debates about it. And you can kind of see immediately from the headline and the subtext that we've used here exactly what you can learn from this article. It summarizes it in a quick, sharp, engaging way. So here we've pulled out the positives of the story. So the people, the organisations, the politicians who are working hard to prevent, treat and cure this virus. This section introduces the audience to role models who are working in this space, but it also helps the audience to feel that a weight is lifted off of their own shoulders. So there are people out there working for change, and the onus is not entirely on the person that's reading this content. And finally, empower. So here's where we inspire action. So we provide the audience with actions that they can take to make a personal difference, no matter how small those actions might be. And this leaves readers feeling hopeful, and therefore they'll be more likely to engage with this topic in the future because they'll leave with a positive outlook on this topic. So, I mean, with coronavirus as an example here, this particular piece of communication was to children, and you might think that it's quite difficult to give kids things that they can do themselves to fight a global pandemic, but there are things like, for example, encouraging them to be more mindful at home, doing things that they like doing, like drawing, reading, playing games, switching off the news and not checking the news too often, and also supporting their family and doing nice, inspiring things for key workers that they might know or come into contact with. So just to round up, here's a sort of quick summary of all of our do's and don'ts in our checklist. I believe we've got this as a downloadable PDF that you can actually download at the end of this webinar to take away with you. So I think, yeah, there we have it, how to make sensitive topics engaging. So I think we've got about 10 minutes for questions, and we've got a couple of members of the Creature Media team on the call as well. So we've got Fran, who you met earlier, and we've also got our managing director, Pete. There he is. Oh, he's gone again. There he is. So yeah, they might well help me in answering questions. So yeah, let's kick off. Has anyone got any questions they'd like to put in the chat?
So we've got one so far, Gemma, from Jessica.
Oh yes. Could you risk getting backlash if you have a positive spin on something that is quite negative? Yes, I think would be the answer to that. I think, you know, without knowing who your audiences are myself, it's difficult to comment for everyone. But I think this is having that understanding, knowledge and trust in your audience. So knowing the way that they are going to react to content, and always kind of trying to preempt the way that your audience might behave. I think if you're really worried about something, that you might have put too much of a positive spin on something, the best thing to do is to use your colleagues as a sort of sounding board. Definitely pass it around other members of your team, and actually pass it to people who are totally independent as well. So like a partner or a housemate, for example, and ask them to read through it, because people have all sorts of different opinions or kind of beliefs around these sort of sensitive topics. An example that I can think of off the top of my head is we have a piece of content on the Nat Geo Kids site about Anne Frank. And I remember when writing that piece of content, not that I put a positive spin on it as such, but we did include positives towards the end. And I remember being nervous about publishing it. And so I actually just reached out to an expert. So we reached out to the Anne Frank house in Amsterdam to get expert opinion on it before we put it live. Should you ever use humour to deal with a sensitive topic, and if so, how? Yeah, it totally depends on the topic. So with that one, for example, if you were communicating on something like the Holocaust or the slave trade, for example, you're probably not going to want to inject humour into that. There might be other topics, such as the climate crisis, where you can inject a more light-hearted tone and maybe possibly some humour. So when we communicate with a child or family audience, and we explain what climate change is and the sort of issues that contribute towards it, we will quite often refer to the fact that cows burping adds to the effects of climate change. And so, yeah, that is using a little bit of humour in there. And knowing we've got a sort of audience of children looking at that, we know that's going to positively resonate with them. And that's the kind of fact that they would remember, and it would stick in their head. It's the sort of fact that they'll then go and tell their friends in the playground. So I think with that one, it's very much just a judgment call. And again, use colleagues, friends, family as that kind of sense check.
I mean, what
kind of words?
Sorry, no, I was just going to say one for me, and in terms of kind of creating content for different audiences, we have to create content for kids, but we also create content for adults. How do you differentiate between the two when you're creating content? Do you still follow the same rules? How does that work?
Yeah, I think like the checklist that we've gone through today genuinely applies to any person of any age. Obviously, there'll be sort of like nuances as Nigel's just mentioned, in the questions about the types of words that you might use in terms of the length of that word and the complexity. But I think in order to engage people, all those rules are exactly the same. So don't overwhelm them. Give them the amount of content they need or information they need to understand something, but you don't need to go over the top with that. Yeah, the best thing to do is just to be quick with your communication. I mean, people of all ages are time poor. So kids, we always say, for example, have a really short attention span, but actually adults, of any age have a really short attention span too, because everyone's busy, working people are overwhelmed with content all over the place these days in our sort of digital age. So yeah, I think the rules apply to all ages.
Cool.
How can you balance the need to respond to an audience timely on a topic, but your whole story is not yet complete, i.e. not sure all the positive actions yet? Okay, so I think you're kind of asking if it was something newsy, for example, like the coronavirus pandemic, how do you put a piece of communication out there even though you don't have all of the story yet? I think you can do that by just being quite honest and sort of accepting about the fact that we don't have the full story yet. So when we wrote the coronavirus article that I showed you in as one of our examples, and that was quite early on in the pandemic in the UK anyway. So that was probably early March, I think, that I wrote that. And obviously now things have changed massively. That was before lockdown. It's easier if you're doing this online because, of course, you can come back to that content later and edit it. But I think it's okay if this was a piece of print communication, for example, or something that you couldn't sort of update as the story changed. I think it's okay to be open about the fact that we don't have the full story yet, and that this is a sort of emerging situation.
And I think you can ask people to come back as and check it again as time goes on, and being objective and showing exactly what you know now is really useful. But then, bringing them back to it if you can.
Yeah, exactly. Sorry, we had another question from Nigel, which was, thanks for the interesting info, really useful. Question, any tips on what kind of words kids understand? They understand the word burp, and they understand lots of sort of rude words like that, actually. We probably get the most positive reaction from them with those. But in terms of kind of, the kind of level of words that we're using to communicate with children, a really good place to find inspiration for this is by looking at children's books, so children's literature. So you'll probably find that a lot of the words that are used are kind of like, I don't know, 7, 8 or 9 characters in length, and probably not much more than that. When we're producing the magazine, as an example, we do challenge the kids sometimes with more challenging, larger words, complex words that they might not have heard before. We don't do it all over the place because that's just going to be disengaging. But for example, trying to think of a particular word, but I can't think of one. But let's say we were talking about the climate crisis, and there was a specific word. It could be a greenhouse gas, like it could be methane, for example, and that might be a word that an 8-year-old has never heard before. So we will challenge them by including that word because we want them to learn from this content in the same way that you'd want an adult to learn from the content too. But we just always will provide a kind of translation of what that means in brackets alongside any of the more complex words.
Cool.
Got another question.
Matthew.
Matthew,
Good one.
how do you balance the call to action from the audience without making it sound like they are the issue or problem if they do nothing? Yeah, that's a really good question. I suppose we provide ideas for how people can take action if they want to, but it's never in a sort of pressurizing tone where, like you should do this, you should do that. We usually use words like consider making a donation to a rainforest charity, for example, or try to live in a way that doesn't harm the planet, try to, wherever you can, buy sustainable seafood, that kind of thing. So I think you can do it, but you can take a sort of soft approach so that you're not placing any guilt on the reader.
Yeah, I'd agree with that.
That's good. Ideally, how many positive actions should be suggested? Is there a good number provided to be effective to be retained and adopted? I can't say that I'm picking a number here, but I can't tell you why. I think it's just from general experience. I would say 3. And I wouldn't say any more than 3 because I think after that it starts to turn into almost like a shopping list. So yeah, 3 things that are small and easy actions. I think there is like scientific research around things in 3s being more memorable. So yeah, I think 3, and that is, I'd say, generally the number that we use in our communication. So I mentioned earlier at the start about Clark's. We worked with them to communicate about endangered species because they were launching a range of shoes that were designed to kind of look like the colours and the patterns of different endangered species. And we created sort of educational fact files on a number of endangered species. And at the end, we had a call to action, and all of them were 3 things you can do to help this specific species. It just had a nice ring to it, and it wasn't overwhelming, as we already kind of discussed.
I'd also add to that that when you're thinking about doing in 3, which I completely agree with, it's always trying to maybe have each of those being a step up to the next. So have something that's really easy, but can, immediately give that person some gratification for what they're changing. And then at that point, you kind of built them to one point where they've gone, oh, okay, this is actually easy. I can do this. This is easy, right? Let's go to the next one. What's that? And then the third might well be something that they actually really have to go out of their way to change. But it is that stepping stone approach of doing that. And then at that point, suddenly you find that they are, they're willing to change everything, and they'll go and, look for other ways within their own home to kind of, change their plastic use and all sorts of stuff. So, yeah.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I think we are just about to run over on time, so I think we might have to leave it there. If anyone does have any other sort of burning questions that they didn't get a chance to ask, please don't hesitate to get in touch with us. We'd be really, really happy to answer questions. So we've got our sort of general email address here. You've got my email address and also our web address if you wanted to have a look at any case studies that we've been working on lately. We've got some very nice comments coming in.
I've just shared the checklist. We've got like a one-pager helpful checklist of what we've covered today. And also we do have a Creature Media newsletter, so I will share that now as well. If you click the link, we send sort of regular topical updates. It's very interesting. I read it myself. So yeah, thank you so much for thanks so much for joining today, everyone. I hope you've gained some useful content strategy tips to take away with you. As Gemma said, if you've got any questions, just email us on the address on screen or take a look at our website. We've got some case studies of previous things that we've done for people. So yeah, that's it. Thank you again. Stay safe and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you, everyone. Take care. Bye.